I was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan, but I moved around a lot growing up because my dad was in the Army. So I've lived in Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, and even Germany when I was really little. I'm an automotive clay sculptor. I work for one of the big three, and I work closely with designers on developing models for the cars that are going to be on the road 3 to 5 years from now. My background is fine arts. I actually went to college for creative studies to study fine arts, and while I was there, I started learning how to do sculpture, and particularly figure sculpture, and I found that I was good at it. I think about how I grew up and where I grew up and the many different places that I lived and how that gets into my art. I lived in places that were predominantly black, and I've lived in many places that are predominantly white, and in all those places, like anybody else, I just wanted to make friends and fit in. There were times in my life where I really felt like an outcast. There were people, kids on a bus who looked at me and, called me a zebra because they could tell that I wasn't one of them. I wasn't quite black, And then I've lived in places, where I've had white friends who were very friendly to me, but I think because of their family background, they found it fun to make racist jokes to me. Race and racism had really been on my mind since I was born, really, because I was born into this family that was mixed, and very early on, the national problem of racism and the history of racism in America really influenced my upbringing in very profound ways. I'm taking my art in a direction that I've never gone before, and I don't see anybody else doing anything quite like what I'm doing. And I don't know ultimately where it should end up and who should see it, who needs to see it. Like I say, I'm really selfish. I'm really doing it for my own benefit, my own well-being, and my own understanding. I'm pushing boundaries. I'm pushing my own boundaries in my work on what's okay to make art about. It's tricky because I'm a realist artist. I create realistic scenes. These are landscapes and figurative work that exist in a realistic world. But the serendipity comes in place because I tend to bend the rules of reality just enough to make the image work. That panther piece, it's called Self-Portrait as a Panther. That piece really is about obviously it's a self-portrait, but I'm using the Black Panther and White Panther's image as a reference to my parents, because I'm biracial, so I come from a mixed background. But because I'm using the Black Panther, the panther symbol, it's touching into bigger social issues. So really, that piece for me is in many ways just carving out a space for myself and going back to looking at my childhood and trying to heal certain wounds that I experienced either in my family that was divided by race, or things that I experienced out in the world. And I'm not from here. I've only been here since 1998, but in that time I've lived in Detroit, in the city, and I've lived in several of the suburbs, and I want to say this area is my favorite place to live in Michigan, and all the places that I've lived. I lived in a lot of towns on Southwest Michigan, a lot of smaller towns, and I feel safer in Detroit than I ever did in those places. But in the time that I've lived here, and because I've lived in the suburbs and in the city, I did notice the segregation. You know, predominantly white suburbs, and then most of the black people live in Detroit, and that's just a product of the history of Detroit